Right, so welcome back, everyone. So tomorrow marks the 34th anniversary of the 1990 attempted coup. You would remember that over the course of 6 days, members of the Jamaat al-Muslimin held hostages at TTT, Radio Trinidad, and the Parliament, including then Prime Minister A.N.R. Robinson. This morning, we do have with us former Senate President and current political leader of the Hope Party, Timothy Hamill-Smith. Now, Mr. Hamill-Smith and the political leaders of the NTA and COP plan to attend the wreath-laying ceremony outside the Red House tomorrow. Good morning, sir. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Good morning. Very good to be here. Good morning to all your viewers.
Yeah. Let's talk about the significance of that trip tomorrow with you, the NTA, and the COP at the wreath-laying ceremony.
I think beyond the question of who are attending, because that's what you identified, we have to recall this is a country event. If a country fails to recall its history or learn from its history, it's doomed to repeat the events. We look at the memorial on Memorial Day. We memorialize an event that took place on the other side of the world, and we should. Democracy was challenged at that point. And here in Trinidad and Tobago, 1990 was a point where terrorists, if you like, invaded our parliament. Our democracy was at stake. And if we fail to recall that, and that's why you have a memorial for, if you fail to recall that, then you are doomed to repeat it. And you heard Prime Minister say a scheme was being hatched in another place in the SSA to have a coup. And today when you look at it, look at the amount of artillery that we are known to be out there. Every now and again the police bring out all these guns and parade them. They've found these guns. I don't know how come they always find these guns, but nobody's attached to them. Nobody's in possession of them. They just happenstance, as it were. And therefore, we need, as a country, and we, the political parties, the NTA, the COP, and HOPE, have, yes, at this stage, combined to come together to say, yes, it is important we keep this day in our memory. We honor those people who stood for democracy, because there are many who fell. And yet the country, our politicians on either side of the divide, the two major parties, they were absent from the parliament that day, and I'm not casting aspersions on them, but they are absent basically again tomorrow. That is a sad reflection. And therefore one says to oneself, something must change, or else we are doomed to repeat it. And of course, we had a commission of inquiry. There was a report in 2014. This is the 10th anniversary. Have they looked? There were recommendations then. I don't know if people are aware. Recommendations that will look at the security architecture of Trinidad and Tobago. Have we done that? Or have we just paid lip service? A recommendation that we should honor those who fell, honor those who stood up for the democracy, including many arms. If you go back and look at it, WASA and TNTEC were part of that line. 610 was part of it. TTT were part of it. There were ladies and gentlemen who stood up and worked through that.
Why do you think, though,
we ignore that?
Why do you think, though, this confusion, as it were, over the past 34 years to, I don't want to say commemorate, but maybe commemorate may be the correct word, observe, there has been a hesitation by the politician. Because as you know, Mr. Hamill-Smith, you have this eternal flame outside of the parliament. It has been moved to the, let's say that would be the northern side now of the Red House. But over the years, we have seen sometimes the politicians would be there, sometimes they would not be there, sometimes you would see activists there. And you spoke about honor. have we, you think, honored the victims of this in the way that they should be honored? Because there was an argument, or there is an argument, that there may be a hesitation by the politician to do this because it may also give the impression that they are honoring the insurgents.
I find that difficult. I mean, that is tantamount to saying we celebrate, we memorialize Memorial Day.
Yeah.
And what we're honoring is the attack on democracy by Adolf Hitler. That's what that if you put that interpretation on it, that's what you would be saying about Memorial Day. Mm-hmm. But it is really very strange that the two major parties, of course, the party in power at the time were neither of the major parties that are there today, but in fact are reflective of some of our group, as it were. And yet they fail, they refuse almost to make this day. What had been recommended is that a memorial should not just be the flame, but the names of those who fell, that there should, the report says there were 25, but there probably were more like 34 or 35. There were people who stood up in that parliament, and nobody will forget, hopefully, attack with full force when a gun is at your head. How many people have that, stamina, that energy, that willingness to stand up for country? You hear about Dr. Emmanuel Hussein. He was attempting, people don't recognize that the injured included the terrorists inside the parliament and the hostages. So both the hostages and those who took over the parliament had received injuries. Injuries, if left untended to, could have led to their death. And what did Dr. Hussein do? He was a minister of health at the time. He went around tending to their wounds. He recommended, whether you were Muslim or whether you were one of the parliamentarians, we must tend to this. He's the one who recommended, look, if you don't take Mr. Robinson out of the parliament, then he may die on your hands. And to their credit, the Muslimin allowed that to happen. And there were others in the same case. If these things are untended to, gangrene can set in.
Yeah.
And he should be a man honored. That's what the report. This is an independent report. I don't know anybody suggesting that they had a political agenda. Nobody said that. But I go back. If you fail to recall the history and the lessons from the past, you will keep repeating it. That's not just an aphorism that is empty. It's full of promise. And we must stand up as a people, and the politicians must lead it.
You speak about lessons. What have we learned? Have we learned anything?
It seems not. That's just why we are doomed to repeat the past. And here, you have the Prime Minister saying that, I don't know if he recognized that here we were failing to recognize 1990. But that the same thing, according to him, was being hatched elsewhere. Today, I think that we are in a far worse position, given the amount of artillery is out there. It's been said it's artillery to fight a state, which is what happened in 1990. But the guns back then would be a laughing stock compared to what the gangs have today within their armory if they decided to take up arms against the state. Are we going to wait for that moment? We see it happening, murders every day, multiple murders now. And we sit back and should not that spur our politicians who stand up for us, who stand up for country, who represent it, to say, we must be there. We must be there on the 27th of July to recognize this event, to give honor and praise to those who stood up for democracy. On
2 occasions during our discussion, you touched on that situation at the SSA. As you look at that situation at the SSA, you look at recent statements of the Prime Minister, you look at recent statements by the political leader of the NTA, and then you look at the response of the National Security Minister. Yesterday, the Prime Minister also spoke about the SSA. What's your view? What's your perspective on that?
Sure. And that's part of the report. You need to review the security architecture. They identify the SSA as being one of those. You need, because it is always a case that these units, which are empowered to a great extent to protect us, could turn against us. And, you know, we seem to have allowed things to take their own course. The police service itself, which is there to protect and serve, what we find is that their detection rate is abysmally poor. And we've become a nation known for its murderous nature, as it were. And there's a fear. I think we don't recognize the amount of, we walk around in fear. We perhaps don't have it apparent to us all the time, but you know, you look over your shoulder. If it was nighttime, you certainly would be a little more alert to the fact that this could happen, and it should not be so. So that, yes, one needs to constantly look into these bodies which form part of ours. So whether it's the army, are there things that we could do different? Should they still be barricaded in Tetra, or should they be elsewhere? That's one of the recommendations. You know, how do you ensure? Of course, we recall too back in 70, the army raised. So this is not impossible.
Yeah.
And so democracy requires it to be eternally vigilant. And we demonstrate that by being there tomorrow to honor those who stood up for democracy, to remind ourselves that unless we are vigilant, these things can reoccur.
Mm-hmm. If you'd allow me, Mr. Hamill-Smith, to touch on one of the big stories over the past few hours, and of course it deals with the Prime Minister's appointment of the Port of Spain South MP, Keith Scotland, as a minister in the Ministry of National Security. And this is what the Prime Minister said. There are 5 areas that I expect that Minister Scotland would focus on, not the least of which is the police and, of course, offender management, management of illegal immigrants, drug trafficking and money laundering, along with drug enforcement, some of the responsibilities of the minister who is going to take his oath of office later on today. What sort of impact do you think that this is going to have at all?
So drugs and guns are at the heart of what the Prime Minister has talked about. So what should be done about drugs and guns? Well, number one, we should have scanners on the port. But not only scanners, you see, and the Minister of Finance recognizes that the truth is that when there are elements within our population, when you bring the example of scanners, but it's also technology in other forms, there are sabotage from within. That's the truth of the matter. So if you are going to have scanners, the truth is you should be leasing those scanners, accompanied by maintenance, operation, repair, and then we'll see a difference. We are just playing around by spending millions of dollars on new equipment that we know will be sabotaged or no use made of it. Why? How come we haven't a greater? We're part of CARICOM impacts. If you follow what they've done, they have managed both to get guns, drugs, and people prosecuted along with it. But Trinidad and Tobago, for some reason, has never been part of that. We need that assistance, because what Impacts does is works along with Interpol and your international allies. So, because we're a small country, we don't have the resources to go after on the territorial seas of Trinidad and Tobago.
But does this appointment make sense to you?
Well, it's, bows gently towards the call from the people to say that the Minister of National Security is failing abysmally. I'm not sure, and I don't have anything against Mr. Scotland. He made some foolish statements I'm sure he regrets making. He's a bright, intelligent young man. But I don't think anybody in this country has any confidence that anything will change. If it were to change, if we wanted change, there are the dramatic steps you would take of allowing, in terms of guns and drugs. We need to stop them coming into Trinidad and Tobago. They just didn't, we don't make them here. They've come in through our ports, and the only way, therefore, is to secure your territorial waters from this entering. And the only thing I see happening here that can work is through impacts, through the whole Caribbean getting together, but together with Interpol, together with our allies, having shipwrighter agreements. I don't know if you recall, Mr. Pandey had called for shipwrighter agreements in his time. And there were many who said, oh, we'll lose our sovereignty. And Mr. Pandey responded by saying, well, we could lose our sovereignty to those who import guns.
Yes.
Or we could get help from another nation.
Yeah. Mr. Hammersmith, I just have about a minute again, and I want to refer to a statement signed by you, Mr. Griffith, and Mr. Sinnett. And some people are seeing this document as the beginning of things to come, an alliance, as it were, between these three political parties.
And I think that that's a correct interpretation of things to come. We are working hard to make sure that we get it right. We're not just jumping in a band together and say, let's do it. And we've started working over the last 3 weeks, and we have a program working towards what we like to see as our ultimate end. I don't know what shape or form that might take. You might ask, will there be 3 parties? Will there be 1 party? Will there just be an alliance? I don't seek to predict that because it takes hard work. We have to have a common vision for the country. We have to have policies that we feel all we can stand behind and implement to make the changes that we in Trinidad and Tobago want. So yes, I believe it will be a dynamic force, a force to be reckoned with in the next election, and will perhaps shock some of the other parties who just stood by and done nothing